Okay, good morning, everybody. I think we are live.
Yay, good morning.
We are excited to be here this morning. We are, I just brief introductions. I'm Kelly Guidry, and I'll let the other two ladies introduce themselves.
I'm Brenda Tillman.
And I'm Erica Salee.
And we are with Readiness Group. We're excited. So we are going to be jumping on today to talk about how do we implement a resiliency program in our own department, which is a question we got asked last week.
Yeah, Kel, so last week we got the opportunity to get some questions afterwards. And you guys, we're just getting this thing started now. So what we're hoping is that eventually we'll have a good following for people to ask questions about resiliency, what's going on, what's happening, how do we, and here's our big thing now. You know, we've been really good at downstream resiliency. We've been really good at responding to bad things in life. You know, we've been really good at saying, okay, now you can get counseling, now you can get this. But what we're not really good at is that upstream resiliency. So eventually, we're talking now about how to build a resiliency program in your organization, any organization. But eventually what it's going to go to is individuals, because it's our own individual responsibility to know what we need and to get it, so that we've got that upstream resiliency, so that when all of a sudden something really bad happens downstream, we fall off that waterfall, and here we are with all this stuff that we don't quite know what to do with. Now what we've got is the ability and the strength and the resiliency to bend back and establish and use resources that are going to make a huge difference on the backside of that. We want post-trauma growth, post-experience growth, whatever that might mean. And so we're really excited about going that direction and letting people know that it's within us to get those answers. And we've got all kinds of resources, but we want you to reach out and begin using those and doing some of the things that we'll all talk about here.
Yeah, so I know last week we had that question, and we did drop a link to one of our resources, which will help you kind of identify and understand maybe what the needs are of your department. So we'll go ahead and include that in our comments this week as well. But if you have questions,
Kel, I just want to say it was really kind of exciting to, when we got off, we had somebody immediately write and ask, how the heck do you build a resiliency program in an organization? So, and all of us together, we all got just very excited about that question, because we said, that's the perfect question, isn't it? And so that's what a lot of this today is going to be about. How do you build that in your organization? How do you know you have one?
Yeah. So, all right, Erica, you want to jump in and maybe share a little bit of insight? So I guess maybe start with our own first responder resiliency program, which is kind of how we've developed and thought about, you know, conceptually, how does a resiliency program get built for a department?
Absolutely, Cal. We're working with 9 cities in Cedar Hill and 8 other cities.
Our own first responder resiliency program. Sorry, that was very
bad. Oh, okay. I was like, yeah, we're working with 9 cities, Cedar Hill being the host city, for a grant that they acquired through the state on building a resiliency program for their region. And so we've really kind of honed in what it is that works and what doesn't work for these departments. And some of the lessons we've learned is, you know, first and foremost, it's got to be a program. It's got to be a recognized program by your people that provides them with the resources they need to build their own individual resiliency. And so what we have found that works for that is that if you take it kind of a 3-pillared approach of starting with the individual, and then the peers, and then the community resources is honestly the best way to look at it. So what do you do for the individual to help them build resiliency? In order to help them, they've got to have the knowledge of what resiliency is and what works to build it, right? And so that comes from education. You've got to have resiliency workshops, different ways of changing the conversation at the individual level towards resiliency as a strength, away from mental health issues as a weakness, right? And so you've got to include solid education for your people and individual resources for your people in order for them to take the responsibility to build their own resiliency.
And Erica, I want to what we're seeing that referred to as right now a lot in all the programs that are being established is we're breaking the stigma. And that type of individual thing breaks the stigma toward recognizing that you have the ability to work brain health. And so I think that's individually, all of a sudden we go, wait a minute, I have the ability to do that. And it begins to change the conversation and break the stigma.
Yeah, and that's really the upstream side that we talk about, right? The education really focuses heavily on the upstream side. And when we talk about upstream, what we're talking about is how do you get left of the critical incident? How do you, first responders notoriously have always had critical incident response programs, but have not prepared to be able to walk into the critical incident with a clear plate so that you can grow from it on the other side versus experience post-traumatic stress. And so, the individual level, you're really focusing a lot on upstream resiliency. How do you structure your habit patterns and your coping strategies around building the upstream resiliency and managing both your chronic stress, which honestly is the biggest portion of what people experience on a daily basis, as well as work through any previous critical stress that's kind of stacked on your plate that you haven't worked off in the past. And so that's really what the individual level focuses on. Then you look at peer support, right? You've got to have peer support in place to be able to offer a daily level of processing. So when you do experience kind of the small critical stresses that the first responders often experience, sorry, I've got an old dog behind me trying to stand up. When you try to work through the daily critical stresses that you're experiencing, you've got to have a readily available, free, you don't have to schedule it, someone that you trust level of support so that you can process through that stuff on a daily basis. In addition to that, the peer support, the peer advocates in your program need to build resources around your people, right? So they're responsible for really managing the program, and putting the resources in place and being able to refer their individuals to those resources, as well as getting advanced training in some of the peer support resiliency models that are out there so that they can offer some of the advanced knowledge to your department that not everybody's going to go through that advanced training, right? So that's the peer support. They're also responsible for having your critical incident response plan, your downstream plan. So if something big does happen that's department-wide, you guys have a plan in place to be able to respond to it in an effective way to help your people grow from it by getting them the resources that they need. And then we go to the behavioral health or the community resource side, right? Individual resiliency strategies, peer support are not always going to be enough. We hope that we can change the conversation enough that they become, that those resources become enough for as many people as possible. But it's not always going to be enough. So you really have to have the resources in place through counseling, through culturally aware counselors, trauma-informed counselors who get the first responder culture, because not everybody does, as well as any other community resources that are out there, the chaplains, the physical resources, chiropractors, physical therapists, massage therapists, all of those things that can kind of help an individual who has kind of reached a crisis point and wants to work some of that stuff off their plate. You've got to have those resources ready to go, vetted and available to your people so you can meet that need when it does come.
Yeah, and I want to say too that what we are finding, and whether it's a first responder organization or whether it's an aviation organization or whether it's an educational or a medical or whatever it might be, you guys think about this. I mean, think about the COVID, think about the last year, think about the isolation, all the things that have gone on. Resiliency programs are more important now probably than they've ever been, right? And it's just a general awareness. What we're seeing as we talk to organizations right now about resiliency and about taking care of their people, but about their people taking care of themselves, is that they've got more set up than they realize. Yeah. Like our question to people is, do you have a resiliency program? And their answer is no. we don't have anything. And then all of a sudden we start talking about things and it's like, oh my gosh, well, we do have that. I mean, we've got a certain procedure that we do for emergency response. We do this. All of those need to be rolled into what you now see as your resiliency program. And then all of the things that Erica was just talking about, those things are integrated into that. So everybody's kind of on the same sheet of music. And we talk about the peer process as something huge because there's a lot of things hopefully in this Facebook Live that we're going to be able to get into. But if you're purposefully peering, if you're doing peer support for a reason and the right way, the chances of that helping to mitigate the long-term effects of this becoming something really challenging is really good. And so what we're saying here is that you probably have a lot of things already established either in your life individually or in your organizations. But by pulling these all together and saying, this is my plan. One of the things as a therapist, after people go through something really big when they come into my office, I'll ask the question of, what did you do with that? And that's kind of your resiliency plan, right? What did you do with that? What did you do with the experience you just had? Something big, something little, whatever it might be, something that's sticking with you, something that just kind of ruminates. And the question becomes, what did you do with that? And 9 times out of the 10, the answer is, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean? What did you do with that? So this is building your own resiliency plan, building an organizational resiliency plan. This is, what did you do with all that? What is the plan to get through the challenges that you face, not only on a chronic basis, not only on a day-to-day, whether it's the kids not in school anymore. I watched that dad just so frustrated on TV the other day on the news about the school board not being able to get the kids back into the schools and his kids losing that level of education, because that's the chronic stress is the finances, the school, the COVID, your kids not being able to sing in choir. Now we're having to send in our voices individually. The things that just kind of day to day impact our lives. We need a plan for those things. And then we need a plan also for the critical situations. And if you're in a high threat, high stress culture, the chances of you experiencing critical things regularly is probably pretty good. I think about the oil industry right now, and I think about all kinds of different organizations that need that resiliency because, man, they've got to be able to bend now and come back, right? That's what resiliency is bending and being able to go with what's going on and being stronger on the backside from this, adjusting to it.
And I think it's important to recognize when you're looking at building a resiliency program is that not everybody comes to the table with the same level of resiliency and resiliency strategies. And so it's very helpful from an organizational perspective to have those resources in place that help teach them that resiliency. And we'll talk more about what those resources can be because we don't want to take up half an hour and all day with this Facebook Live. But it's important that you think about that fact and know that you've got to have resources in place that help educate people on how to build those strategies, as well as a transformational culture that's willing to discuss these things as strength building versus weakness, right?
Right.
And Kel, I'm just going to add one last thing because I know we're running long, but the next question then is, okay, we know what we want our program to look like. How do we fund it, right? And that really is one of the biggest questions because there's not a lot of funding out there for this kind of stuff. You can do a lot of this pretty affordably based on resources you already have in place. And it's just a matter of pulling them together and helping identify them as a program and communicating those resources to your people. But there is also grant funding out there for these kinds of programs. There's a grant out right now called the First Responder Mental Health Program through the Criminal Justice Division in Texas. If you Google eGrants, eGrants Texas, and you go into the current grant availability, they've got a whole list of what grants are available, and the First Responder Mental Health Program is one of those. So maybe in the comments we can drop that link. So it's due February 11th, so it's pretty quick, but it is possible if you kind of want to get a head start on what some of the resources are that you can put into your program, or if you're already in the process of building that and want to look at that grant funding. Just know that that's out there, and it's out there so far annually. And so know that you can find those resources. Grant funding is fantastic. But also don't be afraid to start now if you don't have it, because you probably already have a lot of resources in place that you don't even recognize, like Brenda said.
Yeah, and Kel, let me just throw this in here too. Erica, on our website, we've got an assessment of what you might have within your organization. Erica, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're actually building that right now, so it'll be on our website pretty soon. But we're going to be putting an organizational resiliency quiz on the website. So right now we have a 10-step checklist that'll kind of help you to build the program. But we're going to put an organizational resiliency quiz on there that can kind of help you identify what you already have and what you don't have, so that you can look at what you do have and strengthen that area, and then figure out how you can fill holes for anything you think you might need for your department or organization. Yeah.
I'll add into the comments, I'll add both the eGrants website as well as that 10-step checklist that we already offer. And once we get the organizational resiliency quiz online, I will add that as well to this. I do want to go back and just say one of the things we really push is the everyday peer support process. That formal peer support process is a really big deal when you do have those critical incidents, but that every day, if you have somebody that you can just call and say, hey, I just need to chat, that's so huge, and we've actually turned it into a verb. So peer it is something we regularly do. We use this within our own selves and amongst each other all the time. I'll call Brenda or Erica and say, hey, I just need to tell you, or I need to dump this really quick. Mm-hmm. And so, it's just huge. When you get into the habit of creating that dialogue and opening that up, I think that's such an easy way to start the process of building your own individual resilience.
Right. And Kel, I love the fact that we really push the concept of somebody having walked in your shoes. If you're talking to another cop or another educator or another, accident investigator, the opportunity for them to understand what you're experiencing is probably already there. I mean, it just makes it that much easier. But it doesn't have to be somebody who works with you. Just remember, you identify who your person is, because whatever that means, if I have something that just kind of has deposited there on that plate and I'm thinking to myself, hey, this just kind of bothered me. I mean, the opportunity to get that out and tell somebody that makes it significantly less impacting in the future. So what we're looking for here is who's your person, and how much opportunity are you giving that conversation to take away the strength of whatever you experienced, right? That's what we want. We want this not to stay here. We don't want the rumination of this getting worse and worse and more challenging to deal with. What we want to do is recognize it kind of bothered me, and then get it off that plate. And that way we're bringing that clean plate to the table every time. So who's your person? And how often are you using this as your resiliency plan? And I'm telling you guys, it should be daily. I mean, you should know who your person is. Could be a brother, could be a sister, could be a fellow firefighter or fellow first responder, whomever it is. But identify them as your person, and then use, and we've got all kinds of information about the peer support, the purposeful peering process. Because if you're just walking in and asking somebody, hey, how you doing? And they say, fine. And by the fourth fine, you probably realize they're not fine. But we don't push much past that. It's not doing a lot to help process whatever's going on in there. So we've got the purposeful process listed on that website, and it'll give you an idea of why we do a sensory experience. What did you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell out there? Because it starts organizing the information and helps to put it away where it needs to go. So that's, again, a lot that we'll hopefully get into as we do more of this Facebook Live. We'll do one of these completely on the peer support process, because we really believe that that's very important, as Kelly said.
All right. Well, on that note, I think we're going to wrap up. If you have more questions or want more things answered in our next Facebook Live, go ahead and drop that in our comments. We're happy to answer. Otherwise, we'll be back next Friday at 9 and joining you. So grab your cup of coffee and join us again next week.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much. Please start joining us and drop those questions. We really want the opportunity to answer them.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.